Good morning, welcome to this morning's webinar where we're going to be looking at Geocortex Access Control. Okay, I think we'll get started now. So as I mentioned, this morning's webinar, we're going to be looking at Geocortex Access Control. I'm Aled Nicholas, I'm a senior consultant in the Geocortex team here at One Spatial. So we previously ran a webinar on access control earlier this year, where we looked at the architecture involved with access control and then ran through the different types of permissions you can set. So today we're going to be looking at a couple of different aspects in a bit more detail. So just to give a quick overview of Geocortex Access Control, it's easy to administrate, fine-grained permission for your ArcGIS apps. As I say, if you don't know what access control is in the slightest, it may be worth going back and having a look at that webinar from earlier in the year. There will be a link later on in the webinar as we go through. But for today, there's two aspects we're going to focus on, and that's going to be the geometry filter and the advanced expressions. So we'll jump straight into it. So we can see we have access control. Once you've configured access control, you will have all your ArcGIS servers that you've added. And within there, you've got your server folders. Within your folders, you have your map servers, feature servers, the layers attributed to that service, and then you can go through and apply your permissions. One of the things we looked at as well previously was how you could open up your ArcGIS REST endpoint from access control. And this is essentially demonstrating how permissions you apply in access control not only apply to any Geocortex products you might be using, but they apply directly on the ArcGIS service. So if it's used in any other application, those permissions will be inherited from there. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at geometry filters and advanced filters. So let's just take a look at the map we'll be using initially. So we've got an offshore map where we have some ports and we have some wind farms. So the ports covering Northern Europe, got the countries and the attributes, some other information relevant to these wind farm boundaries. And the ports are worldwide ports. So if we're going to look at a geometry filter, what we looked at previously was a relatively simple example where we drew a polygon and we allowed the points within the polygon to be visible and denied the points or restricted the points outside of the polygon. So today we're going to take a closer look at this and see how we can do some more complex things with our geometries. So let's look at this map, for example, and let's say I want to just see English ports. That will be relatively straightforward. You do a boundary around England and you get the points. But just to take that a bit further, let's say I only want to see coastal ports. So if we can see this map, we've got ports, which are the white circles with the anchors in them. We've got ports coming up the Mersey, the Humber, onto the Ouse, up the Thames, up the Severn, the Clyde, the Leaf, etc. So what I'm saying is we only want to see English ports which are coastal. So the way you would need to do this in access control is go to your ports layer, geometry filters, add. We're going to apply this to all users. Select a geometry. Now here's some that I've created previously. It's very easy to create a new geometry as well. You just select add and digitize your area. But for this, I've created one called England Coast. And what we can see is we've got a polygon and then essentially the middle bit of the polygon cut out. So a donut type of polygon. In Access Control, there's no simple way to create this. So what I did was using my desktop GIS, I created the initial English boundary, and then essentially cut out the inset of the English coast. So from that, that's left us with this boundary, which is coastal, the coast of England buffered out a little. So from that, in my desktop GIS, I exported that as a set of coordinates. And with your geometry tool, you can quite easily paste a list of coordinates in, and that will then give you your relevant boundary. So we can see from this list of coordinates, we have this boundary with the center bit cut out. So I'll save that. And if we go back, I've applied that permission to everyone. So once I refresh the viewer, what we will see is not only do we just have the English ports, we have also removed the inland ones as well. So nothing come up the Humber anymore, not going up the Mersey. So that's essentially how you would take your geometry filter to the next level. There would be a little bit of involvement with desktop GIS to create the boundaries you're wanting to do if you're looking for more complex shapes, but it can be done, and you can do it and create polygons with holes cut out the middle, etc. So that's all I wanted to show in terms of the geometry filter. So the next thing I want to look at is advanced permissions. So if we take a look at these wind farms, we can see we've got some in the UK, we've got some down in France, some over in Germany, and we've got some Dutch and some Belgian ones as well. So let's say we have some users set up on our enterprise, and we want to assign certain wind farms within certain countries to specific users. Now, if you have any knowledge of access control, if you saw the previous webinar, you may know that there would be a relatively simple way of doing this, where we could go to our wind farm boundary and apply an attribute filter. And within the attribute filter, we could just simply put the country. The country is an attribute field, and then just put Germany. If we save that and refresh the viewer, what we can see is we only have the German wind farm showing up. So these are all German, there's no Danish or Dutch sneaked in there. Filtered out everything that's not German wind farms. So that's a really easy way of doing it. But if you have a number of countries or a number of users you want to apply these rules to, it can become pretty inefficient to add a new filter for each one. So what we'll do is we'll get rid of that. And one way we can do that is to use advanced expressions. So an advanced expression is using a bit of JavaScript where we can define what users can see what data. Well, that's one of the functions. There's a number of different functions you can use advanced expressions for. So first thing we need to do is we need to create a lookup object for all the users which will be accessing the map. So to do that, we'll just write a bit of code. So we're going to create a lookup object, and we're going to call it lookup. And then from there, we're going to add a set of keys and a set of values. So the keys will be the users we're going to assign, and the values will be the attribute values they're going to look at. In this instance, the countries. So we're going to put Geocortex demo. That's one of our users. And we're going to assign United Kingdom. We're also going to add another user. We're going to call this one John Doe. And they will only be able to see German wind farms. And we'll add one final user and call this user Jane Doe, who will only be able to see Belgian wind farms. So what we've done there is we've created a lookup object which assigns the countries to the users. So the next thing we need to do is add the usernames to the lookup that we created. So if we go const country equals our lookup object, and from there we're going to put username, and you can see that when you're using the advanced expressions, it is intuitive. So if you start typing some things, it will give you suggestions for what you're after. So the lookup is going to be usernames. So the next thing now we need to do is essentially create our where clause. So we've got our usernames, that's fine. We're saying what values they want to see, but we need to apply those values and those usernames to a where clause. So we're going to say if the country and then we're going to set attribute filter. So that's the function we're going to use here. And we're going to say if the country attribute in the layer we're creating a permission for is equal to the country we're creating in the lookup, so that's essentially us filtering out all the wind farm data and applying those permissions to the users we've set just above. We also want to take one further step, so we need to do an else. And for the else, we're going to do set attribute filter again. What we're doing is we're saying that if a user signs into the viewer that is not one of these three users, we don't want them to see anything. So for that, we'll do a standard 1 equals 0. So if you've used Esri data before, if you've used Geocortex workflows before, you'll probably be very familiar with 1 equals 1 to return everything. 1 equals 0 is the standard to return nothing. So we'll use that, and that should be our expression ready to go. So if we save that, and if I refresh this layer, and of course we're going to have technical difficulties. There we go. So what we should see is I can't see any wind farms. And that's correct because I'm signed in as myself. I'm not signed in as any of those users we specified in the expression. So that's all working correctly so far. So if we take this viewer, open her up in an incognito window, and if I sign in as Geocortex demo, what we should see when I've signed in there is this user should only be able to see the wind farms which have been assigned to them. And Geocortex demo was assigned United Kingdom. So we can see our Irish Sea wind farms, we can see our North Sea wind farms down to Thames Estuary, and nothing else, which is correct. So we're only seeing our UK wind farms. Just to show that that is the case, we can see that these attributes are United Kingdom all the way through. So if we just further prove that, we will log in with our other two users and see what they can see. So one was John Doe. So John Doe should only be able to see our German wind farms. And there we are. We can just see our German wind farms. No other wind farms visible. And just to check on the final user, Jane Doe should only be able to see our Belgian wind farms. So once this loads up, we can see just our Belgian wind farms. And that's a really simple example of how we can use our advanced expressions to assign users to work. So you may well have roles and users set up in your ArcGIS enterprise, but they may not be valid for the type of work that you specifically want to do on occasions. So you can use access control to ensure that you can do that. Now, I mentioned doing a geometry filter for each of these might not be the most efficient. Well, essentially, repeating these for each user may not be the most efficient. But if this has been of interest to you, please do take a look out for further webinars where I will show you how we can take this a step further and avoid having to manually enter the information. But that's one to look forward to in the future. And please do note as well that although I've set this up for individual users, we could set it up for roles as well. It doesn't have to be user.name, it can be our enterprise roles. So we can start to really assign this into individual groups and roles rather than users. But in essence, that was the 2 bits of functionality I wanted to take you through today. So if we pop back to our slides, if you do need any more information about anything Geocortex related or anything access control related, take a look at our website at onespatial.com products and Geocortex. There you'll get any information you might need on Geocortex products, including access control. If you are a current Geocortex user, then access control does have its community pages, just like the other Geocortex products do. And that's a fantastic resource where you can ask questions to other users, get a bit of chat going, find some information. And I can't recommend looking at the community pages. It's enough. And if you want to learn any more, then take a look at our previous webinars. I've mentioned the access control webinar. There are webinars about workflow, reporting, printing. So yeah, take a look at that if you're interested. Take a look at news events, events and webinars, and all our previous webinars will be there, and upcoming webinars will be available too. And if there's any Geocortex training you're interested in, we have our updated training courses on our site as well. So take a look through there if you're interested. But other than that, I'll see if there's any questions come through on the chat. So we've got one that's come through. Can you upload shape files to the geometry filter? So at the moment, we can't upload shape files. It becomes quite complex to do so because we need to make sure everything's in the same spatial reference and projection, etc. So for the time being, the only way we can apply our geometry filters is to manually digitize or to use that list of coordinates that I showed. And I've got one more question that I can see. Is all the script in JavaScript? So the advanced expressions is JavaScript. So if I just get my screen back up. So the advanced expressions is JavaScript, but the attribute filters, they're SQL queries. So really simple SQL queries, but yeah, there's a bit of a mix there. And I can't see any more questions. If you do have any other questions, then please do feel free to give me a shout on my email address here. That's aled.nicholas@onespatial.com. But as there are no further questions, I'd like to thank you for your time today, and we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.